The second thing, and I mentioned this was more of a personal aspect that has impacted or helped me develop my leadership style, was having two boys. When I was younger, I had all the energy in the world. I had all the work ethic. I had no empathy, and so it was charging to finish the job without the perspective of the people that I was working with, and in some cases, the people that I was running over to complete the task or the job at hand. And so when I had two boys, I wanted to raise leaders. I wanted to raise boys that were better than me. And one of the things that I had to change was I had to develop empathy.
Today, I'm sitting down with Bruno Maier. Bruno is the president and CEO of United Wheels, the company behind brands like Huffy, All Light, and Batch. But that title only tells part of the story. He started his career at Huffy, went on to build experiences across Pacific Cycle, Cycling Sports Group, People for Bikes, and Rocky Mounts, then returned to United Wheels through All Light and eventually stepped into the role he holds today. It's not a straight line. It's a return, just not to the same place. Along the way, he's seen what strong leadership looks like and what happens when it breaks. He's had moments where the path was clear and others where it wasn't. Moments where things moved forward and moments where they didn't. And somewhere in all of that, he had to decide what kind of leader he wanted to be. This conversation is about that. Not just the roles, not just the companies, but the moments that shape a career. The ones people don't always see. Bruno, I'm looking forward to getting into this with you.
Yeah, it should be fun.
Bruno, when people look at your career from the outside, they see a long arc across some really important companies in the industry. But I'd love to start simple. When you look back on it, what are 2 or 3 moments that really changed your trajectory?
That's a great question. Look, I there are two that come to mind, and the first is much more related to business. The second is more of a personal impact. When I think about my trajectory and how I got here, I like to think about when I was young and the fact that I always had passion. I could always sell. But other than that, I was basically a young idiot. And I was lucky enough to work with some leaders that, one, recognized my passion, two, were patient enough to let it develop, and third, I think they were willing to give me enough rope to make mistakes along the way without firing me in that process. And so I think back to there's a handful of leaders that I think of when I think about people that I learned from. One of the first one that probably had the most immediate impact, early in my career was Chris Horning, who was the founder of Pacific Cycle. And some of these are simple ideas, but Chris really taught me a lot about cost control, managing your expenses. He taught me how to build a team. The reality is that Pacific Cycle, those types of cultures do not come around. We had an amazing team that we all worked together. We were able to disagree, fight, argue, but we all came together as a group to succeed. And we had a ton of fun. We made a ton of money. But the one thing that I think Chris gave me more than anything else was how to appreciate the people that help you get there. And so Chris had an incentive program that really was quite broad and went down within the organization. And so the better the organization did, the better the employees did. So he really knew how to make those employees part of the process, give them ownership in the success of the business. That was a guy that I really enjoyed being around and learning from. It's funny, I probably didn't tell him that for a long time. And just about a month ago, I wrote him a letter to express the appreciation I had for what I learned from him. And so that would be the first guy. The second was Tim Blumenthal, who was the CEO, People for Bikes. You talk about a great human, so empathetic, But Tim's real strength was in strategic thinking and specifically messaging. And I've never seen anyone work on the elevator pitch more than him. And so, really getting a great idea down into a concise 30-second pitch of this is what we do, this is why we do it, as a way to bring support to our cause. Bill Smith, who brought me back to Huffy, is a guy that I will forever be grateful for. Truly empathetic leader, very thoughtful, more of a quiet leader. But when he spoke, it was always from the heart, and it was from a place of care that he went through in getting to the decisions that he made. There's two other leaders that I think that helped build my process and kind of influenced me. One was Claude Jordan, who was the CEO at Huffy after Bill. Now, Claude brought a different perspective. Claude had run billion-dollar divisions for GE. He ran D2C or .com for Home Depot, ran Arctic Cat. And so he ran these companies that were 800 million plus to $1 billion plus dollars, really taught me about board management, mergers and acquisitions, and the perspective of what it is to run a much larger company. And then finally, Bailey Liu, who's our current owner, this is a guy that spends a lot of time thinking strategically. He spends a lot of time in that strategic process. And we do it together quite a bit, but he's also a guy that is a lifelong learner. I've never seen anybody read as many books as he does, and the way that he absorbs that information and then tries to implement the things that he learns into running his business. And so I would say it's the leaders I've been around, the patience that they had to help me develop or let me develop, but they were smart enough at least to tap into my passion, my energy, my work ethic, and let me make mistakes along the way that I think have ultimately developed me into a better leader. So that would be one of the impacts that I think have influenced my decision making and my leadership style.
That's that's beautiful, Bruno, to be able to look back and almost see each component of each of whether they're mentors or leaders at the time, which they become mentors because you can look back and see what you learned from them.
So the second thing, and I mentioned this was more of a personal aspect that has impacted or helped me develop my leadership style, was having two boys. When I was younger, I had all the energy in the world. I had all the work ethic. I had no empathy, and so it was charging to finish the job without the perspective of the people that I was working with, and in some cases, the people that I was running over to complete the task or the job at hand. And so when I had two boys, I wanted to raise leaders. I wanted to raise boys that were better than me. And one of the things that I had to change was I had to develop empathy. I think my boys would probably still call me intense, but I think that they do it more from a standpoint of they understand that they're loved very deeply, and that's the way that I push them is from a good place. And so when I think back to raising boys, I was lucky enough in my career to step back from the corporate world, which gave me more time to be at home. As part of that, I was able to spend more time with them and coach youth sports. And as I was coaching sports, I really fell in love with coaching youth football. And so from age 6 and 8 or age 8 and 10, I coached them all the way through their sophomore and senior years of high school for the older one. But as I was preparing, now I was doing some research on not only play calling and position responsibilities and the overall game, but I also read books about coaching. And there was one book that in particular stuck out to me, and it goes back to that conversation about empathy. And it's called A Season of Life. I think it's by Jeffrey Marks. And it's about an ex NFL player that goes to coach some high school kids. And at the time, this high school had what they referred to as a toxic masculinity problem. And he wanted to shift the idea of masculinity to be, from what it was prior to be more about empathy, relationships, and expressing or pushing your brothers or your teammates through love. And so this book is the one that stuck with me more than anything, because it really was about getting these kids to show respect to each other, to push each other from a place of brotherhood. And so that I think is an area that changed my perspective on leadership. And so empathy is something that I learned. It wasn't something that I started my career with. And I think that what that book and what my experiences with my kids taught me is that when you work with individuals, you can still set aggressive goals, you can still be demanding. But if you do it from a place of love and caring, where the people understand that you have their back, that you're looking out for them, you're looking out for the organization, people will work harder for you. And to me, I think that that is something that's we don't have enough empathy, we don't have enough caring for each other in this world, and so I think that that's been a big part of my transformation from more of a hard nosed leader to still a hard nosed leader, but one that I think does a better job of expressing appreciation for those around him.
That's I feel like that's the older I get, the more I start, I become more aware of that also. And I can't totally put my finger on where it's come from me, or at least coming into me. But the thing I try to remind myself constantly is everyone's struggling with something. And oftentimes what you see on the outside may never, or it's frequently, it's not directed towards you. It's something that they're actually struggling with in another part of their life, or in their mind, or in their heart, or
Yeah.
in their physical health. And I think that is something that gets lost very frequently, especially, in today's climate. We're a little bit of a turbulent time, and it's some leaders they just want to drive, drive, drive. But you've got to realize the empathy is going to help it's actually going to help your people perform better and to their best of their ability. And we kind of see that, like you said, with your children, or all types of relationships for that matter.
It is something that I think it's not addressed enough, especially in kind of when people talk about capitalism or the way U.S. businesses are run. They talk a lot about, yeah, it's just business, whether it's terminations, whether it's missing a bonus. Those are real things, real impacts on people's lives. And so understanding that and appreciating that, I think, is really important to get people to want to work really hard for you.
Bruno, you started at Huffy early on, then built experience through the companies I shared earlier: Pacific Cycle, Cycling Sports Group, People for Bikes, Rocky Mounts, and later came back into the United Wheels business. When you look at that full arc, where were the real turning points?
It was funny. I think that the one of the major turning points for me in my career was, as I was talking earlier about having two boys. We were living in Madison, Wisconsin. We were working for Pacific Cycle. There was a decision to move all the executives to Connecticut to the Cannondale offices. And I just thought to myself, I don't want to live that close to New York City. I kind of like Madison. And so I started to rethink kind of what I wanted to do, and had a great deal of passion for people for bikes. I mean, look, the industry that I love, we're all very clear that if we provide safe access or easier access to facilities, whether it's bike lanes, bike paths, mountain bike trails, that increases the business. And so I made the personal decision to take a step back from the corporate environment at that time, and instead of relocating to Connecticut, I relocated my family to Boulder, Colorado, where I joined Tim and the team of People for Bikes. And so that gave me some time that I needed personally. It allowed me to continue to pursue my passion. I was able to continue to develop as a leader, but it gave me a lot of time to spend at home. And so, in the first 8 to 10 years of my kids' lives, I was gone all the time. I was, traveling, whether it was Asia, Europe, Bentonville, Arkansas, didn't make a difference. I was gone. And so this gave me a chance to really be closer to my wife, closer to my kids. But it also made me realize I didn't like working at a nonprofit. and so wanted to get back into the for-profit business. That decision led to, me taking a minority stake in Rocky Mounts, and that was a time where, it was a small business, small company, and so I got involved in a lot of aspects of the organization. We were able to be successful and grow, but after about 3 years, I sat down with my wife and said, I just don't know that I'm happy doing what I'm doing. I kind of want to go back to the larger company and take some new opportunities." And she responded, "If you can find a job, we'll take a look at it." And I said, "Well, I think I want to move home. I think I want to get back closer to my family." And I said, "So how do you feel about moving back to Cincinnati?" And she said, "Yeah, I'm not thrilled with it, but if you can find a job, make it happen." And so that's when I reached out to you, Tony, because I had worked with Bill Smith, 15 to 18 years prior, knew Bill, respected Bill, considered Bill somewhat of a mentor. Your advice to me was, look, let's not put him in a position, if he doesn't want you back, let's not put him in a position to having to tell you that. Or if there's no job, we just make the whole process easier. And so through you, you reached out to Bill, and when Bill found out that it was me trying to come back, I think he contacted me within like 5 days of your initial contact and said, "Hey, can you be out at the board meeting in 2 weeks?" And I said, "Absolutely." And so within 3 weeks or 5 weeks of you making contact, I had an offer to come back to Huffy. And I don't know that my wife is ever going to forgive you for that, but the reality is that I was super excited about it because it's a company that I care greatly for. It's a brand that I love. It's a 133-year-old business. We're the second oldest bike company in the world. The only company older than us is Bianchi. We've probably sold 225 million bikes since our inception, and we put more people on bikes than any other brand globally on an annual basis. And so we don't necessarily make the highest end or the bikes for the enthusiast, but we provide accessibility to the outdoor lifestyle, to recreation, transportation, and we're the number one kids bike brand in the world. So we put more kids on bikes than anybody out there. But so transitioning back, and I'll talk a little bit about this. When they brought me back, I was managing director of new business as well as president of Allite. And Allite was a new startup business that the company had determined to kickstart in 2017, focused on specialty alloys. So it was a material sciences business. And then the other part of my job was new business development within our core categories. And so in that first year, I had to get my hands wrapped around Allite and what it meant to run a startup in a category and business that I knew nothing about. But also, we launched Batch Bikes in 2018, and then we also acquired Niner. And so it was the first year was pretty much a whirlwind. By the middle of 2018, late 2018, they asked me to just focus on the All Light Material Sciences business. And this was an area that I actually wasn't that thrilled about. Again, I'm not an engineer. I don't know anything about manufacturing alloys, but the opportunity was huge. I passed off Batch and Niner to other leaders within the business and focused on All Light. And this was an experience. We had to acquire engineering talent, quality control talent. We had to buy manufacturing equipment, whether it was extrusion, whether it was laser cutters, testing equipment. We had to source, we had to find smelters that could make our material and maintain our quality standards. And then we had to open up a market. We know the bike space, so we knew we had some lower hanging fruit there that we could go after. But that really wasn't the core of the business. The core driver of that business and the focus of that business was going to be on consumer electronics. We launched vast bikes within a couple years, lighter weight, super shock absorbing frames. It went well, but it was really a small piece, again, not the focus. But we were able to establish a market for our materials, and we eventually partnered with the world's largest consumer electronics company. Going through that process was intense. It probably took us 2 years of material development, refinement, and ultimately we ended up making 6 components for a product launch that was, done about 2 years ago for this company, and it was successful. That relationship still exists today, but come probably it was around 2021 when we first started going to production on that stuff. By late 2021, the passion for bicycling began to start to pop up in my head again. And so in December of 21, I decided to resign a third time from Huffy Corporation and decided to do a startup business in New York. And so a couple buddies from mine from Cannondale days, an industrial designer and an engineer, started to work with a manufacturing partner in New York to build cargo bikes, cargo e-bikes. So for UPS, U.S. Postal Service, and Amazon, that was kind of our target market. We kickstarted that about mid-January, and my separation from Huffy didn't last very long. At the time, in early 2022, COVID had come to an end. There was a global bike inventory problem, and I think the writing was on the wall about how difficult things were gonna become, and the CEO at the time had just decided, it's time for me to retire." It's probably smart. Probably a smart move on Claude's behalf to retire at that time. So by April, middle of April 2022, the board had called me and asked if I'd come back and take on the role of president and CEO, and, I couldn't say no. I love the people that work here, I love the business, and frankly, growing up in Dayton, Ohio, going to school with Huffman kids, this was a company I was very passionate about, and so I jumped at the opportunity immediately, and I left December 31st and was back in the office May 17th, 2022. So about 3.5 months I was gone, 4.5 months. So when I got back, that's where I think in the first week I was back, I called my wife and I said, "I think I've made a huge mistake." Because the inventory, the situation, the outlook for the industry was just really, really difficult. But we have managed through that. 2022 was a tough year, but we took our lumps in that year. 2023 we really started to turn the corner. And then in 2024, we had the greatest non-pandemic year the company has ever had, both in terms of top line sales and profitability. And so we had big expectations for 2025, which, while disappointing, kind of derailed by the geopolitical issues and the tariffs that occurred, but still very strong year and still profitable for the business. So overall, I think it's been a really good transition. I think we've developed some really good long-term strategic plans. I think we've seen major improvements in our marketing capabilities as well as our product development, and we're doing a really nice job of elevating the Huffy brand again and really bringing a lot of young people back to the table when it comes to wanting a Huffy bicycle product.
Bruno, what was it like for you to have, in 2024, obviously to have the best year in the history of the business, and then 2025 to hit turbulence again?
It feels like that's all we've hit since I took over, between the inventory problems and the challenges in 2022 and 2023. When we hit 2025 and the tariffs and the geopolitical issues started to reveal themselves, we actually moved very quickly. And so when we were looking at the election process back in 24, we had identified that, look, if Trump gets elected, there's very good chance that they could implement some tariffs. And so we immediately started working on plans to open additional factories. So in 2024, we opened a factory in Cambodia. And then in 2025, we opened a factory in Vietnam. And this was an all hands on deck kind of situation. We opened a factory in Vietnam within 5 months. And so I think we kickstarted it in December, and by May, we were producing bikes.
Hmm.
And so we feel that we were pretty far ahead of the market when it came to diversifying our supply chain. So today we own 2 factories in China, and we have one factory in Vietnam, one factory in Cambodia. So we're able to kind of find a happy mix between diversified supply chain and managing the tariffs to the best of our ability. And I think that's been demonstrated to our customers, and we've been able to manage, price increases for our customers pretty effectively to date. And so I think it's been a win for us. But to your question of what was it like, it was very frustrating. I mean, you felt like 2024, we finally got into a run rate. We were expecting significant growth. And it's just one more setback when, all these price changes and price issues happen. You see demand drop because the price increases are 10, 15, 25% at retail. So frustrating, disappointing, but look, nothing's ever going to go exactly how you want it to go, and so you have to adapt and you have to adjust. You have to be agile, and that's what I think our team has done to date.
So 2024, 2025, now 2026. What did you learn from 2024, 2025 that you can now use in 2026 when things are as turbulent, it feels, as ever?
And so I think one of the things that we identified in 2024 and 2025 is that in some cases we were spreading ourselves too thin. The chairman and myself got together several months ago and we started to talk about focus. And so some of the things that we're doing is we're really streamlining our business. We're getting our hands around SKU proliferation and SKU rationalization to reduce our SKU counts. We're being more scheduled when it comes to our product development and product introductions. And we're trying to streamline our entire supply chain so that we're minimizing costs, and that way we can provide the greatest value to our consumers. And so I think that focus is the key thing, and simplicity. Those are the two things that I think really came out of 24 and 25. And when we talk about simplicity, it's delete the delete the distractions, kill the distractions. And so by creating a more lasered approach, everybody in the company can focus more on delivering the greatest value for the consumer and our customers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You've seen what a strong culture looks like, and you've also seen what happens when it breaks. Was there a moment where you realized how much leadership behavior can shape or damage an organization?
There was, and I'll keep it high level, but yeah, I would say that my days at CSG, we had a leader that was running the business in 2007, 2008. We were building momentum. We were rebuilding relationships in the IBD when it came to GT and Cannondale. We had a team of people that were motivated and hungry to do the right things, that were putting in all the effort necessary. The culture was moving in the right direction. People were happy. They were satisfied with their responsibilities. And so I thought we had a lot of momentum. One of the reasons I didn't make the move to Connecticut was an updated leadership. They had brought in a industry outsider, and in my opinion was very focused on himself and his own success versus the success of the team and the brand. And so I watched what I thought was maybe the greatest culture I had ever worked in, that was an extension of the Pacific Group, become a very toxic, very, Fortune 100 type environment. And look, that's a good thing in many instances. The efficiencies or the learnings you bring from a Fortune 100 company to the bike industry, always positive. But at the same time, you have to understand the culture that's there. And many of these bike companies is that they're family driven. There's a lot of people that are passionate about the category. They're
Mm-hmm.
willing
Mm-hmm.
to spend their life building better bikes, to being able to ride their bike. And when you disrupt that culture and you try to take the latest greatest business book that you've read and implement that into the system, it doesn't always get adapted the way that you anticipate. I just saw a lot of anxiety. I saw a lot of animosity that was created by poor, and what I think was poor leadership at the time. And so that also contributed in my jump to People for Bikes. But I did see it firsthand, and I've seen it in some other places as well. But I think the key here is it goes back to empathy, concern, and care for the people around you. You can still be demanding, you can still implement new processes, but you have to do a really good job of explaining the why and demonstrating why the why will work. And I think that was a case where I didn't see that as much as I should have.
There was, okay, the moment you stepped away for that short period of time and the business asked you to come back after Claude had resigned, what was going through your mind when that call came to you?
Um, I wasn't surprised. It's funny. I'll take a step back to 2018 when Bill Smith retired. And look, maybe this shows my level of immaturity and or what that I still had some things to learn. But when Bill announced his retirement, I thought to myself, well, I'm the most likely candidate to be the next CEO. And I was excited by that. And I don't think I was even on the radar of the board at that point in time. So that was a little bit of a ego check, which is fine. But the great part about that situation is that I didn't let it get me down. I embraced Claude joining the business, and basically, I enjoyed working with him through most of our projects, and I was able to learn a ton from him. And so while it didn't go the way I thought it would, I did think that I was the right candidate long term. Claude resigning or Claude retiring at the time that he did was also not a surprise. The guy had been extremely successful, and, look, the headwinds that the industry was gonna face at the end of my career, would I wanna tackle that at that point in time? I don't know that I would. And
Mm.
so when they called me, the first call they made was just to check in on me. "Hey, Bruno, how you doing? Everything going well?" And I hung up the phone and called my wife and said, "They're gonna offer me the CEO job within the next 2 weeks." And she's like, "Get out of here." And I said, "No, that why would they call me and ask me how I'm doing?" And so then they called and they gave me the update that Claude was gonna retire and that they wanted a new leader. And so I had a pretty good relationship with the vice chairman at the time, as well as the chairman, the current owner of the business. And so I felt it made a lot of sense. I also had some really strong relationships with the leadership team as well as the employees here. And so for me, it was kind of a dream job, and for them, I think they felt I was the right fit for that position at the time.
That's so interesting, Bruno. I keep thinking about when that phone call was placed to you. And so looking back now, do you think not getting that role when you first expected it actually prepared you for better for becoming the CEO later?
Yep, and it's probably not gonna be for the reasons you think, and so we're the company that we are it owns us is called Covation, and it's a Hong Kong-based company. There are 2 divisions. There's the United Wheels division, which is sales, marketing, distribution, operations, everything outside of China, and then there's FutureX, which is the manufacturing arm. The fact that I ran All for 3 years, I mean, I was spending 20 to 30 weeks a year in China, and so the thing that it did teach me, and it was about, Chinese culture. It gave me I've been going to China since I was 27 years old, but not at that level, not at the management level, not at the involved in the day-to-day decision making. It was just going there to source product. In this case, I had, employees located there. I spent a lot of time working in that culture and sitting in meetings. We had, not only the translation challenges that you have, but the business style and the culture of how people work. That was a learning experience. And so I think it definitely helped me develop a better skill set to be part of more of a global business because now I have a better appreciation for different working styles, communication styles. And so, yes, I think that as much as it was an ego check, it was also the right thing for me. And it gave me an opportunity to continue to develop as an individual and as a leader.
Hmm. That's a significant amount of time in China, and
Yeah.
you're still going.
It,
I'm
not
curious,
not nearly as much as I was. So I
not
think
nearly as much.
yeah, I think in 21, I think I went 13 or 14 times, and usually it was a
Okay.
week to 2
Oh my
weeks.
gosh.
And so I think last year I probably made 7 trips, and this year I'll probably make 5 to 6 trips, but I'm spending more time in our European operation right now, so I'm going to Europe about once a month.
When you have travel plans to go both to Europe and to China, what What are a couple things that you look forward to going into each of those cultures, you personally?
So the team we have in China and the people that I work with are unbelievable. So just the personal relationships is probably one of the highlights. I would also tell you that in the 30 years that I've been going to China, I've never had a bad meal. They know how to feed you while you're there. So that's always a highlight. But for China in particular, I really like spending time with our leadership there. As I said, the owner is based out of our home office in Nanjing, I'm sorry, Ningbo, and we spend a lot of time together just working on strategy and thinking about the next 3, 5, and 10 years down the road. So that's one of the areas that I really enjoy today. When I go to Europe, look, for me, I've always loved being in Europe because of the bike culture. Whether you're in the Netherlands, whether you're in Germany, just being part of that and seeing what the opportunity is for us in the US and other countries to get to that level of bike transportation, commuting, infrastructure, those are real things that can happen. And when that does happen, this industry continues to grow and explode.
And the communities become harmonious.
Yes.
Mobility becomes much easier. As you moved across these roles and chapters, what was your internal filter for deciding what to do next?
Was I having fun? And, that's I know that sounds like such an immature answer, but decisions that I've made a lot of decisions about whether I'm having fun or not, and whether it's pursuing my passion, and so, I think, I talked about the time at CSG where there was a leadership change. That was where the fun of that business got sucked out. Going to People for Bikes, I loved it. I loved every minute of it, but the thing there that I think was probably the most frustrating is that when you're at People for Bikes, all you're doing is selling goodness, right? You're selling access to health. You're selling access to transportation. We're selling, kids being able to explore and get outside. When you go to Congress or you go to meet with a congressman or a senator over and over again, and they're just like, nope, we don't have any money for that, that became disappointing because it's like, look, I'm not asking for defense funding. I'm not asking, like, I'm asking to make kids happier, to give parents access to exercise and recreation. So that's where the fun part ended for me at People for Bikes. But look, it was a great experience and we did great things while I was there. So it's fun. Like you can work hard, you can be passionate, but if it's not fun and you're not feeling rewarded, you're not feeling as if you're getting something in return, not financially. If you're not getting a emotional connection, that's when you need to make a move. And look, I've done it without a job. When I left People for Bikes, I didn't have a job to go into, and so it was scary, but it was the right thing to do at the time.
And has that changed over time, or is it still rooted in the same instincts you had earlier in your career?
It has not changed over time. I think that you have to love what you're doing. If you're not, it's just a paycheck and you're just going to work. And the second you come to an office and you're like, ugh, I don't want to be here today, or you're just there to collect the paycheck, then find something else to do. Find something else to do that
Mm-hmm.
can get your juices flowing and allow you to excel.
I hope a lot of people listen to that segment right there, Bruno. When you became CEO, what actually changed for you, right? Not the title, but like how you think, how you make decisions, how you show up day to day.
Okay, I can talk about how I make decisions, but first I'll touch on what changed for me most, and it was the weight of the job. And I've been in a leadership position of some kind since my late 20s. I've had employees or a senior title, and maybe I was too immature to understand the people that work for me or what the job meant to them. But I would say that we have, I think, 2,500 employees globally. Not all of them report to me. Some of them report to Bailey. But the decisions that Bailey and I make impact these employees. And so when we don't deliver on expectations or we don't maybe hit incentives, whatever. I take it personally, not for me. It's because the people that work here are they've got bills to pay, they've got kids to raise,
Hmm.
they've got houses they want to buy, there's vacations they want to take. They all give 100% effort to their job, and so that to me is when we don't hit expectations, it disappoints me personally. And I definitely feel the weight of that because I want people to feel appreciated. I want them to feel that they're valued for their work here. I want them to be able to see that there are future opportunities for them. So when we talk about developing employees or giving them a career path, those are the things that I think for me have hit the hardest. And probably are something that I worry about. That's probably the thing that keeps me up late at night is are we taking care of the employees well enough? That's the biggest change when it comes to decision making. And again, I try to keep it as simple as possible, and I try to focus on long-term strategic issues. Look, when you talk about short-term decisions, there are things you can do today that'll impact the P&L, that will impact the market, but what does it mean to you 3 and 5 years from now? And so I try to spend more of my time focused on bigger vision ideas of, being the steward of the brand, making sure that our products are meeting the needs of the consumers and less on the day-to-day decisions because the short-term decisions, they should be handled by the employees. I think the decisions that are made by the senior leadership team, the directors, the managers, the rank and file staff are probably more important on a day-to-day basis than the decisions that I'm making. And the key there is empowering them to make those decisions and giving them the flexibility to do that without fear of repercussion. Look, we're going to make everybody makes mistakes, and that goes back to the thing I said about the leaders that I had worked for. They were patient enough, and they gave me enough rope to do some dumb things, to make some mistakes along the way. They didn't fire me for it. They'd sit you down and they'd be like, "Hey, why'd you make this decision? What did we learn from it? And let's not let's not make that decision again." And that's really where we have to empower our people. But when it comes to decisions, I think the key with decision making comes down to the data. First off, you have to understand the consumer and the customer. You have to take that into the thought process of what you're looking to do for the future. Secondly, you've got to get rid of all the distractions. You've got to simplify what you're doing so that everybody can be focused on it. And then finally, you need to be agile because nothing is going to go the way that you planned it. And so you've got to be able to adapt. You've got to be able to react quickly, not overreact, but take a step back and just say, okay, what has changed? How do we adapt to this and make the right decision going forward? And then I'll talk a little bit more about the decision making for the empowerment piece, which is if people are clear on the mission, if they're clear on the core values and they're clear on the strategic pillars, then and their decisions are aligned with that, with those, you should be moving this business in the right direction.
What do you think people misunderstand about the difference between being a strong executive and being the person ultimately responsible for everything?
Strong. What do they misunderstand about it? To be to be honest, I don't know that I see a major difference. All of our senior leaders have accountability to this business. We're a team. Like it's I'm not in my office making decisions by myself and then dictating those decisions. Look, I never ever think that I'm the smartest man in the room. I try to be opinionated, and part of that is to create constructive conflict and debate so that we can get to the best answer. But the you can't do this job alone. I'm wholly reliant on our head of sales, our head of marketing, our head of product, our head of operations, our head of HR. Together, we make those decisions. I think maybe you My role is being more collaborative and bringing them together and putting them all on the same page so that they're marching to the same tune in each department. Maybe that's my biggest role, but they need to be doing the same thing within their own ecosystem. And so hopefully it starts with what is our mission? What are our core values and what are our strategic pillars? And if we're all aligned on those, then it should flow through the system pretty seamlessly.
When did you realize that?
Look, and maybe this is the part where, when I was telling you about being young and having leadership positions and maybe the immaturity of not realizing it, maybe that's still maybe that's still my problem is that I I I don't look at this job any differently than I looked at the last job. There's more weight to it, but it's still my job to make sure that we're all aligned as a group and that we do things in a win-win fashion or a lose-lose fashion. And I don't know that that even answers your question, but that's kind of the way that I look at it.
When Let me ask you this, Bruno. When people look at your career from the outside, what do they miss?
What did they miss? I don't really spend a lot of time worrying about what other people think or see, and I'm gonna try to get to this answer here shortly, but I hope people respect me. I don't know that they do. Maybe they all think I'm an idiot. I don't know, but I
No.
think that what people
No.
what people see in me is, someone that's been committed to the industry. I think that they see that I'm very passionate about it. I think they think I'm a massive extrovert that is outgoing and confident, and in the reality that it's just the opposite. I'm an introvert. I like a podcast makes me uncomfortable as all get out. I don't like to be the center of attention or significant recognition. I would prefer that to go to the team. What they don't see is that I probably like I feel like I ask myself all the do I have imposter syndrome? Am I the right guy for the job? And I worry about that way too much. And I have to remind myself, God, it doesn't matter. You're in the job, so you're either going to make it or you're not. But those are the things that I think people miss is that I think they see one side of me. They've seen what I've done in my career, but there's a lot of anxiety that goes with that.
I think about this all the time. You and a few other CEOs that I work with, that people don't realize the weight you're actually carrying, and that what you share externally does not always align with how you feel internally, but you have to stay in the leadership role to keep people, number one, to make sure they still have their jobs and they're, like you said early on, paying their mortgages, putting their kids in college, taking a vacation that they want.
Yep.
But I think the hardest part for people to understand when looking at a leader from the outside is that weight is heavy. It's 200-pound dumbbells walking up the stairs. It's bigger than I can even than I understand, and I have a little taste of it just from the interactions I have. And when I think about one thing I always thought about you is that you genuinely care about people. And I'm not sure that always gets associated with CEOs. And I'm curious, how has that shaped the way that you lead your team?
It goes back to kind of the conversations we had around my boys, in that caring about people, you can be demanding. You can set high expectations. You can hold people accountable. If you disrespect them, if you treat them as secondary or not a valued part of your team, that's when you lose them. But if they believe that you love them, if you believe that they care about you care about them, you care about their family, you care about their well-being, you care about their development, people will give you everything they got. They'll work as hard as they possibly can to help you succeed. And so for me, as I said early in my career, I didn't necessarily recognize that. I would just do whatever it took, no matter who I ran over. You leave people in your wake in that case. And so today, I think my leadership style is more built around the idea that we win and lose together. We're in this together, and we're going to appreciate people's strengths and their weaknesses. We're going to try to help develop the weaknesses into strengths. We'll try to take advantage of the strengths that they do have. But we also have to realize that there are not everybody's going to be successful. In some cases, success and failure are not in the control of the employee themselves. There could be market changes that result in sales drops. And
Hmm.
so, understanding those situations, having empathy for those situations, and not just drawing a black line in the sand that says, you didn't do what you're supposed to do, so that's it. Those are the things that I think have changed as I've grown, as I've paid attention to people that I respect. That I think would be the biggest difference between 50-year-old Bruno and 28-year-old Bruno.
That's an incredible realization, Bruno. You've you stayed close to the sport for a long time, riding, training, blowing my mind doing Leadville 100. How how has that part of your life shaped the way you lead?
Eh, so, it's a great question, and look, yes, for a period there, it's been a while since I've spent that many hours on my bike. It makes me think of a quote by Calvin Coolidge about persistence. And it goes something to there's nothing in the world will take the place of persistence, talent will not. The world is full of unsuccessful men with talent. Genius will not. Unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. Education will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent. And that quote is what I think of when I think about whether it's Iron Man, whether it's Leadville. You just don't give up. You just keep spinning the pedals. Look, I wasn't the world's greatest cyclist, but I wasn't slow. And I'll use an example of Leadville. When I signed up for Leadville, I assumed based on my speeds, my abilities, 9.5 hours, I should be finished. 11.5 hours later, I crossed the finish line, and it was heartbreaking, but it was just that whole mantra of don't give up, don't stop, keep pedaling, you can finish this. And I apply that to business. The things change all the time. Look, we just went through 2022, 2023, the worst bike years, maybe 2024 even, the just awful, awful bike market years. All companies are suffering. Nobody's winning in this type of environment. And you can either throw your hands up and give up, or you can just put your head down and keep going and keep fighting, keep trying to do the right things to get the business to the next level. So I would say that endurance sports is about persistence, and so is the business world. I think I mentioned earlier, maybe I didn't. I never go into a meeting believing that I'm the smartest guy in the room, ever, because I'm not. But I have the ability to share an opinion. I'm not scared to do that. I have the ability to bring people together to collaborate to find the right answer. And if we work together as a team and we continue to persist in our efforts, we will find some solutions to either our challenges or the problems we face.
And that aligns with the Calvin Coolidge quote. And
Yeah.
like you just said, to finish Leadville at 11 and a half hours at 14,000 feet by just putting one pedal in front of the other one, it's the same. It sounds like it's the same thing that's helped you, grow United Wheels and go through these ultra turbulent times, one foot in front of the other.
And look, there are things that come up all the time where I'm not an expert. I don't have the answers. I could easily just ignore it or push it off. But you've got to say, okay, this is our thing we got to deal with. As frustrating as it may be, just put the work in and we'll find a solution. So I truly believe that being persistent and determined can help you overcome a lot of weaknesses. I am a perfect example of it.
I agree. When you look at people who are early in their careers trying to grow into leadership roles, Bruno, what's something you've learned that you took a long time to figure out?
It's funny you bring that up, and I'm going through it with my own kids today, is that, whether it's pay raises, whether it's a promotion, whether it's bonus that you want or what you expect, it's never gonna be exactly the way you want it, and you can't let that get you down, you can't let it dishearten what you bring to the table every day. I literally had a call with my son the other day about, a pay raise that he got, and he was like, "Well, it's not enough, it's disappointing." I said, "Son, you're a year out of college. Are you learning? Yes. Are you growing? Are they involving you in decisions? Yes. So then I want you to think about all the benefit that you're getting from this job today. And it's not just about the pay. It's about your development, your skill sets that you're taking away. Said you can always jump ship and find a better paying job. That's the easy route. And look, I'm all for people making as much money as they can, but sometimes it's the harder path that will pay the bigger rewards long term. And so that would be something that it took me a while to learn.
I think that's a really good thing for anybody listening, and it's not always obvious, right? Sometimes the harder let me rephrase that. Oftentimes, the harder path is the right path. And when you look back on the whole arc so far, what are you most grateful for?
I'm grateful that I spent 35 years in the bike industry. I grew up in a bike family. My dad commuted by bike for 35 years to his job at the EPA. He owned a bike shop on the side. As a child, I spent weekends in the bike shop. All we did was ride bikes. When you were 12, you got a bike trip with my father. And so I rode my bike from Cincinnati to Kiawah Island, South Carolina in 1984. It was a death march. It was not fun. There was nothing fun about it. But it was one of those things where that's all we did. And so by the time I was 16, I never wanted to see another bike again, ever. And just by happenstance, Tony Huffman offered me an internship at Huffy Bikes between my junior and senior year in college. And then they hired me out of college as well. Biking introduced me to my wife because she was connected with the Huffy Corporation businesses, and so I met her through that. And then when I moved to Pacific Cycle and Brunswick, I rediscovered my love of cycling. And so, look, it probably was like a 10-year gap where I wasn't riding and didn't love it. But I can't imagine my life without being able to ride my bike whenever I want to and being able to get out there. And so I am grateful for being able to spend my career in an industry that I'm passionate about, that I think does great things for the world, that is an outlet for transportation for those that need it. It's an outlet for recreation. It's an outlet for health. And then you think about all the people I've met along the way in all the companies I've worked with, the competitors that I've worked with. It's been fantastic. So look, I'm just appreciative that this has been my life. So,
It's that's a lot to be grateful for.
yeah.
If your sons listen to this conversation at some point, what's something you'd want them to understand about your career that they might not just see from the outside?
That it's not always easy. That look, you're gonna have ups and downs, that you're gonna make mistakes, that you're gonna get into conflict with your boss. And none of that is game ender. It's an opportunity to learn, it's an opportunity to develop. Every challenge that comes their way is an opportunity to develop a new skill set. And the last thing I would say is that take your people with you, that as those around you, give them the recognition and good things will happen. People will fight for you. Those would be the key messages. It's hard. It's a long road, and a handful of mistakes aren't going to end your career. It's an opportunity to adjust.
Bruno, this was great. There's a depth to your story that doesn't show up on a resume, and I think people are going to take a lot from hearing how you've navigated it over time. And I appreciate you being open with it. Thanks for doing this with me.
Yeah, Tony, always a pleasure talking to you. So thank you very much.